Okay, let's talk about how we actually assess or quantify intelligence. So to determine how is someone intelligent or not. Um, we define intelligence testing by assessing someone's mental aptitudes and comparing them with other people. Okay, and this gives us a numerical score. So the test gives us a numerical score, and then we compare your score with someone else's or a normal score. Okay, the first person to kind of come up with this idea of assessing and coming up with a number was Alfred Binet. He was actually asked by the French government to come up with some sort of test to identify if a French child was going to have problems in a regular classroom. So if they should be in a regular classroom or if they would need extra help. So he kind of came up with this first standardized intelligence test that was used in France. What he did is he set out to find a child's mental age. So we have our actual age, right? So whatever age you are right now, 17, 18. And then the test would figure out what is your mental age, or the average age of individuals who achieve at a particular level of performance. So basically, we're going to compare your mental age, where your brain is developed, with your actual age. He did not want to label children. He did not want to label children as like gifted, disabled, normal. What he wanted to do was just to help children's educational experience. How can we help French children do well in school? So that was his main goal. In the US, Lewis Terman wanted to develop a test that could be used for American children. He liked what Binet was doing, and he wanted to develop a test that could be used in the United States. We actually still use a form of the Stanford-Binet test, which is what Terman came up with. So Terman worked at Stanford University. So all of his research actually went credited to Stanford. So that's why the Stanford is in there instead of Terman and Binet, because it built off of Alfred Binet's original test. So what is the Stanford-Binet test? Today, it kind of varies on what it looks like from person to person. There's different levels. There's some for children and there's some for adults. And children are asked to look at different figures to try and copy or trace everyday problems that they would have to solve. Things like, if I have this pitcher of water, how many glasses could I potentially fill? Adults are asked to solve analogies, explain proverbs, or potentially look for similarities in a group of objects or words. And what happens is the examiner looks to find a mental age of that person. Okay, so at what step can that person answer all the questions? Okay, so there are different questions. And once you do that, okay, where can you move on? Where you can move on to more difficult problems. Okay, and William Stern then took this idea of finding someone's mental age and decided, okay, well, let's figure out a number, a quotient, right? A number that we can use to quantify if your mental age is normal or not. And so he came up with this formula. Your mental age divided by your chronological age times 100, and that gave you your IQ score. IQ score is no longer computed this way. We use it a little bit differently. However, we still can compute an IQ score. And the IQ score, we're going to talk about how it is standardized and what the scores mean in a little bit. We'll come back to it. But I want to continue talking about some of the tests that are developed to test our age. So, or our in IQ. So David Wechsler came up with another scale, one for children, one for adults, again, that was an intelligence test to try and determine someone's intelligence level, and these are the most widely used IQ tests today. You will take a sample Wechsler test tomorrow in class. So we'll kind of like see how this type of test works. So what this does is it measures your overall intelligence. It consists of two parts. Your verbal, so whether or not you can define words and comprehend words, and then your performance. And this performance is looking at assembling objects, arranging pictures in logical orders, etc. And normally, your verbal and your performance scores come pretty close together. Usually, your scores are fairly the same. However, looking at those individual scores can give a more precise idea of your abilities if you're more verbal or more hands-on kind of intelligent. So those are the types of tests that we have talked about, that test for intelligence. So we're going to look at some of those in class. But we have we need to actually talk about testing in general now, okay? And we're going to look at two different types of tests. The first are achievement tests. Achievement tests are intended to reflect what you've already learned. Basically, you are showing what you have achieved in a particular content area. An example, the AP exam, right? So that is an achievement test. You are showing what you know, what you have achieved in psychology. Aptitude tests are intended to predict how well you're going to do in something. So an example might be the ACT or the SAT, right? Those are meant to predict how well you are going to do in college. Those are aptitude tests. When we are constructing tests, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind. In order for these tests to be acceptable, they need to fulfill three specific criteria. The first is standardization, second is reliability, and then the third is validity. We're going to talk about each one of these. The first, standardization. Standardization is that we take the test and we develop norms that we can use to base everyone else's score on. Basically, it's an average, right? So norms are developed by calculating the average score achieved by one particular sample group. And then everyone else who takes that test is compared to the average of that group, okay? So that's how the AP test works. So the AP test was given to a group of freshmen in college within the last few years. Though that score was then averaged, those kids' scores were averaged, and we use that to compare your test results to get where you fall on the scale of 1 to 5. Okay, so that's how standardization happens. Periodically, over time, tests are re-standardized. Basically, we give them to a new group of students or sample, and they retake the test, and we determine, do we have to change those norms or do we keep them the same? Intelligence tests also do this. The normal score for an intelligence test, however, is a 100. So, something to ponder. Let's say I took the AP Psych test back in 2005 and got a 4. Now you take the test this year and you get a 4. What does the Flynn effect say about the difference in our scores? The Flynn effect says that over time, humans are becoming more intelligent, meaning that intelligence scores are going up. However, this re-standardization that happens keeps those 4s similar. Okay, so my 4 that I took in 2005 might be the same score that you got now, but you probably know more than I do because of the Flynn effect. Okay, but re-standardization allows us to keep those norms to compare to people of the same era, you can say, or time frame. Okay, normal curve. We've talked about this before. Standardized tests that you take establish a normal distribution of scores. So if we have our AP test, we are going to have a normal curve. Okay, and we've talked about all those percentages before. You should know those already. But numbers to remember for this particular unit are for the normal curve for the intelligence test, okay? So our mean for the intelligence test is 100. That's our average. That's like normal. You are of average intelligence. If you're above that, you're above average intelligence. If you're below it, you're below average intelligence. And if you're above, or if you're 130 or above, you're gifted, which is 2 standard deviations, right? Because our standard deviation is 15. So if you're 2 standard deviations above, you are gifted. If you're 2 standard deviations below, you have an intellectual disability. So Francis Galton argued that intelligence is quantifiable, it's normally distributed, and that he believed that we could assign a score for intelligence, which then determined who fell below or who fell above it. So he's kind of the one that decided, hey, we should have a normal distribution of intelligence. Okay, so our second concept of test construction is reliability. We've talked about reliability and validity before, but let's just refresh. So a test is reliable when it yields consistent results. Remember, if your friend is reliable, they're always there. So we have the same idea with reliability in a test. It's always giving you the same results. In order to establish whether or not a test is reliable, there are a number of different procedures. So the first is split half reliability. We divide the test in 2 equal halves and assess how consistent the scores are between those 2 halves. So, okay. Reliability using different tests. So we use different forms of the same test to see whether or not those tests are consistent between each other. And then retest reliability, which is using the same test on 2 occasions and getting whether or not you get the same result. Okay, so that's reliability, consistent results over time. You know a tape measure is reliable. This is just an example because every time you measure your height, you get the same height, right? Or however many times you measure a chair or a desk, you're going to get the same reading. That's reliable. Validity is whether or not the test is actually doing what it's supposed to. So if I say that something is valid, it's correct, right? So if I have a coupon and it's a valid coupon, it means that I can use it. So if a test is valid, then it's testing what it should test. So we have content validity, which is the extent that a test measures a particular behavior or a trait. So does that test actually is it actually testing for that behavior or trait? And we also have predictive validity. So is the test actually going to predict the behavior that it's supposed to? So ACT, SAT, predictive validity would be, does that actually give us a true idea of who is going to do well in college? A test can be reliable, but not valid, meaning we can get consistent results over time. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's measuring what it says it's measuring. So when you want to measure your weight, you don't use a ruler because that would not be a valid measurement of your weight, right? That would mean it is not valid. Next example, if we're looking at testing for, specifically, a second grader is taking a math test. All the problems are word problems with higher vocabulary, and he struggles to show that he really knows math because of it. Is the test measuring only his math? No, it's actually testing his vocab more than it's testing his math. So this is an invalid test. Okay, we're going to pause here. In the second part of this video, we're going to talk about some of the extremes of intelligence.